Every city has people who are convinced that rules exist only for others. They interfere in other people's lives, provoke conflicts, demonstrate superiority, and have no doubt that they are right. But sometimes it is this confidence that causes their downfall. Today, we will look at 5 stories in which petty aggression, demonstrative integrity, and a desire for control ended suddenly and irreversibly. Although these cases seem unbelievable, they all show how a single moment can change everything. Enjoy the movie. By the evening of September 12, 2015, the residents of the gated community of Sunset Ridge in Scottsdale knew for sure that the next meeting would not go quietly. Tensions had been building for years, and today they reached a point where even the most reserved neighbors began to discuss how long Patricia Whitfield's rule would last. As usual, she was the first to arrive at the clubhouse. Her neat folder of papers lay next to the podium, and her hands methodically flipped through dozens of sheets of photos of so-called violations. A paint shade that was a shade too light, a gnome in the garden that degraded the aesthetics of the community, and a kiddie pool that the neighborhood kids had put in for the weekend. For Patricia, these were not trivial matters, but manifestations of chaos that she felt it was her duty to curb. When the clock struck 6 in the evening, there were about 70 people in the room. They didn't talk to each other, just looked at the screen, where the presentation was already connected, and at Patricia, who stood as if she were about to give a lecture on discipline rather than a meeting. Her voice was sharp, almost metallic. She said that the situation in the community was out of control, and that the new rules were the only way to protect everyone's investment. The first photos appeared on the screen: a fence that was too high, a lawn that was not cut to the standard, a car parked a few centimeters closer to the curb than allowed. People began to move in their chairs, and muffled sighs were heard. But when Patricia moved on to the proposed fines, a few voices in the audience could not contain themselves. She tried to shout them down and climbed onto a chair by the fireplace so that everyone could see the next example of negligence. Her heel slipped on the smooth wooden surface, the chair wobbled, and Patricia instinctively drew her hand back, trying to steady herself. Instead of support, however, she felt nothing but emptiness, and instantly flew down. The dull thud of her head against the stone edge of the fireplace sounded so distinct that the room was simultaneously silent. Patricia lay motionless, her notebook of fines open on the floor, as if a reminder of the years of petty wars she had waged against her own neighbors. Several people rushed to her side, someone called an ambulance, but within minutes it became clear that she was not showing signs of life. Her death was instantaneous, as abrupt as the way she led the community. The clubhouse was left in a silence that was hard to break down into words. All those who had dreaded her visits with a camera for years were now silent, trying to process what they had seen. No one had expected such an ending, but it was a tragic conclusion to a conflict that had long gone beyond the boundaries of everyday norms. The evening of March 8, 2014, in one of the cozy restaurants in Charleston's historic downtown, began as usual as hundreds of others. The soft light from the wall sconces glinted on the dark wood of the tables. The smell of sauce and freshly baked bread wafted from the kitchen, and the room gradually filled with the buzz of conversation. The waiters were following precise, well-established routes, unaware that in a few minutes a scene would begin here that would forever go down in the history of the restaurant. Brenda Hale walked into the restaurant in her usual manner, slowly, looking at each employee as if she were evaluating them before an upcoming performance. Many establishments in Charleston recognized her. For years, she had honed a pattern in which staff mistakes, sometimes real and more often imagined, became a way for her to get money or free meals. She knew when to raise her voice, how to choose her words, how to change her tone of voice to make any situation look like she was the injured party. That evening, Brenda chose a table against the wall, ordered the soup of the day, and disappeared into her phone, glancing at the staff from time to time. When the waitress placed the plate in front of her, Brenda quietly moved the napkin and pulled out a small silver nail that glinted for a moment. She brought this object with her, carefully wrapping it in foil so as not to lose it. The surveillance cameras would later show her leaning over the soup a little, moving her hand, and the nail was at the bottom of the plate. Everything was done quickly, in one clear gesture, honed by years of practice in manipulation. The plan was simple. Wait a few minutes, call the waitress, make a fuss, threaten to sue, and the restaurant would either reimburse the bill, offer a cash certificate, or at least be afraid of a complaint and make concessions. Brenda could already picture herself holding the nail in her fingers, showing it to the whole room, and then saying in her usual manner, "I could have killed myself with this. Do you realize the responsibility?" This time, however, something went wrong even before her performance began. When the waitress came up a few tables away, Brenda took a sharp breath, about to start rehearsing her outrage, that first loud sound that was supposed to get attention. She leaned over the soup to show off her find, and as she took that sharp breath, she picked up her spoon, which contained vegetables, broth, and a nail that had accidentally stuck to the surface of the soup. It all happened in a split second. The waitress later recalled how Brenda made a short, strange sound, not a scream or surprise, but a sob that seemed to be cut off in midair. The nail slipped off the spoon and ended up in her mouth as she inhaled. The edges of the small metal object touched the back of her throat, causing an instant spasm, and then it slipped deeper, blocking the airflow. Her eyes widened, her hand clutched the edge of the table, and her face began to change color rapidly. At first, no one realized what was happening. From the outside, it looked like another emotional scene, which Brenda's reputation was full of. The waitress took a step forward and asked if she could help, but Brenda couldn't answer. She grabbed her throat, threw back her chair, and fell to the floor. There was a lot of noise in the hall. Someone called an ambulance. Someone tried to give her first aid, but any manipulations were useless. The nail blocked her breathing so deeply that it was almost impossible to get to it. When the paramedics arrived, they pulled her out from under the table, trying to restore airway patency, but time had already run out. Her heart stopped in front of dozens of people who, a minute ago, had no idea that a small metal object could cause such a sudden death. Later, the police will review the camera footage. They will show not only the moment of the fall, but also that short, almost imperceptible movement of her hand when Brenda was putting the nail in the soup. This will be the key to understanding what happened. Her death was not the result of the restaurant's negligence or an accident. It was the absurd ending to her own fraudulent game, which this time got out of hand. By lifting a small piece of metal to the surface of the liquid dish, she wanted to be compensated, and instead received the last sip of her life, which undid years of manipulation and became an unexpectedly accurate symbol of her own behavior. Marlene Doyle appeared in the parking lot of an Omaha supermarket so often that she was perceived as part of the landscape. She would show up at any time of the year, film anyone she thought was breaking the rules, and demand that the store employees clean up their act. Her belief that she was fulfilling a social mission eventually turned into an obsession, and conflicts became a way of asserting herself. In the summer of 2016, the city was battered by heat in the morning. The temperature rose to record highs, and the asphalt area in front of the supermarket heated up so much that hot air haze was blowing through it in waves. But it didn't matter to Marlene. She went on another raid, convinced that her presence was necessary to stop the trespassers. That day, she noticed a woman who had parked her car at a slight angle. In reality, the wheel was just on the marking line, but that was enough for Marlene. She approached the driver with her phone in hand and a sharp tone of voice that was well known to the store employees. At first, it was just a simple argument. The driver tried to explain that she wasn't blocking the lane, and Marlene interrupted her louder and louder. After a few minutes, the attention of the customers turned to them, and Marlene deployed her usual rhetoric about social irresponsibility and danger to others. The temperature continued to rise. Marlene was wearing a thick, heavy cotton shirt and dark jeans that absorbed heat. Witnesses recalled that spots of red began to appear on her face, and her movements became abrupt, as if she was losing control not only of her emotions, but also of her body. The driver tried to end the argument and leave, but Marlene followed her, not allowing her to get into the car. The sun was beating directly on the asphalt, the air seemed to stand still, and every breath was harder. It was recorded that 20 minutes after the conflict began, Marlene bent over several times, holding her knees, and even sat down on the edge of the curb, as if trying to catch her breath. However, every time a passerby asked if she needed water or help, she would sharply refuse. Her stubbornness seemed impenetrable. She insisted that everything was under control, even though her voice was breaking and her hands were shaking. After a few more minutes, witnesses noticed that she began to speak more slowly, as if the words were passing through thick air. She continued to criticize the driver, but her phrases lost their logic, and the pauses between them became longer. These were classic signs of heat exhaustion, but Marlene did not recognize it. She brushed aside people who came closer and even tried to take a few steps to change her position, but her legs were wobbly under her. At some point, she turned completely pale. Losing her orientation, she took a step back, then forward, as if trying to keep her balance, but her body was no longer obeying. Marlene crouched down, lowered her head, and then slowly fell sideways onto the hot asphalt. The driver, who had just become the target of her accusations, was the first to rush to her side. She tried to lift Marlene's head, but she was unresponsive. People called an ambulance, and several witnesses held shades from jackets and bags over her to somehow reduce the effects of the scorching sun. When the paramedics arrived, they immediately began cooling and resuscitating her, but her internal processes had already reached the point of no return. The heat stroke caused a sharp rise in body temperature and brain swelling. In the ambulance, she stopped breathing. An hour later, doctors only confirmed the fact of her death. While the police were processing the incident, there were still people standing in the parking lot who had witnessed it. Many of them said the same thing. She didn't want help. Her belief that she was in control of the situation became part of the tragedy, the moment when her own perseverance turned into a trap. Marlene Doyle died the same way she lived, convinced that she was right, even when that very thing deprived her of any chance of escape. The evening before Christmas on December 23, 2017, in the Portland Nordstrom was typical of this season. Crowded aisles, nervous shoppers, lines at the checkout counters, and a constant hum of voices that merged into a monotonous background. Employees were used to this pace, but this time a person appeared in the store whom they recognized from afar. Linda Blackwood moved slowly, with the ostentatious confidence usually reserved for people who know how to create a problem where there is none. She was pulling a cart filled with several expensive items that looked like they had been used for at least a month. Linda had repeatedly used the same pattern, buying branded items, wearing them, and then returning them, complaining about poor quality, accompanied by emotional accusations and threats of lawsuits. Many stores had already put her on their unofficial lists of unwanted customers, but she was finding new locations where she was not yet known personally. This time, she targeted Nordstrom's customer service department. When manager Jennifer Walsh approached, Linda immediately began talking about the unacceptable condition of the merchandise, fraudulent sales pitches, and emotional damage she had allegedly suffered. Jennifer calmly explained that it was impossible to return the items in this condition. The cameras would later show how Linda tensed up at this point. Her shoulders stood up, her hands gripped the basket tightly, and her eyes turned cold. The atmosphere began to heat up quickly. A few seconds later, Linda was raising her voice, attracting the attention of the customers. When a few people turned around, she switched to her usual tactic of stage fright. She waved her arms, paced back and forth, and demonstrated tired and theatrical sighs. This time, however, her irritation was not just for show. She really did not expect to be rejected so bluntly. Jennifer stood still, repeating the store's policy in a clear but calm tone. This was a trigger for Linda. She started grabbing items from the nearest shelf, small decorations, souvenirs, and throwing them at the return desk. When the employees tried to stop her, she stepped back and grabbed the first thing that came to hand. A massive crystal vase with carved edges, displayed as part of the holiday decorations. The vase weighed more than 3 kilograms, and witnesses recalled seeing Linda tense her arms to try to hold it. But she finally lifted it above her head and threw it toward the counter where the manager was standing. The intention was obvious, not to hit her, but to frighten her, to create chaos that would reinforce her position as a victim. However, at the last moment, Jennifer managed to duck. The vase flew over her shoulder and hit the wall with full force. The crystal shattered instantly. One of the large fragments, sharp, almost like a blade, bounced back in an unpredictable trajectory. Linda was standing too close. The fragment hit her right side of the neck. Everything happened so fast that many of those present did not even realize what had happened. At first, Linda just froze, holding her neck with her hand. Then her fingers turned red. She took a step back, another, tried to say something, but her voice disappeared in a hoarse breath. Blood quickly oozed between her fingers and then began to trickle down her sleeves. A few seconds later, she fell to the floor, knocking several boxes off the counter. Panic spread instantly. Employees rushed to her side, some tried to press the wound, others called for medics. But the deep damage to the artery gave no chance. The blood loss was too fast. Even with a lightning-fast intervention on the spot, it would have been difficult to survive. When the ambulance arrived, Linda was no longer responding to light or voices. A few minutes later, her death was officially recorded. After the incident, the police reviewed the camera footage, which showed the full chronology, from the beginning of the scandal to the moment when the shard returned to the person who threw the vase. The report stated that the death was the result of her own actions. For the store staff, it was a shocking ending for a person who had been building conflicts for years. For many customers, it was a sudden realization of how quickly uncontrolled aggression can turn an ordinary evening into a tragedy. The afternoon of July 4, 2013, at the West Shore Plaza shopping center in Tampa, seemed like a typical holiday. Crowded parking lots, hot air mixed with the smell of hot asphalt, and families rushing to take refuge in air-conditioned stores. In this chaos, there was one person who felt completely in her element, 51-year-old Deborah Morrison. She came here almost every day, regardless of the weather or the workload, and spent hours recording violations on her phone. A crookedly parked car, someone else's child touching the dividing line, a trunk left open for a moment. Deborah didn't work in security or administration, but she acted as if she had official authority. She always carried homemade warning papers in her purse and hundreds of photos of cars she deemed dangerous to others in her phone. On that day, a family with 2 children loaded their purchases into their dark blue SUV. They were parked in the usual place, not blocking the passage, but that was enough for Deborah. The car, in her opinion, was too close to the cart return area. She appeared next to him suddenly, bringing her phone up to the driver's face with a sharp movement. The words came out quickly, clearly, and in a commanding tone. She accused the man of danger to children, the woman of disregard for the rules, and all of them of violating public order. The family reacted calmly, trying to finish loading their purchases, but Deborah did not stop the pressure. When her husband asked her to step aside and let them drive away, Deborah did what she often did in similar situations. She stood behind the car, folding her arms across her chest. She stated that she would not allow them to leave the scene of the crime, even though there was no such thing as a crime. The man could not believe the absurdity of the situation. He explained that he was not going to move until she left. But the heat was rising, the children were crying, and the woman was begging him to end the conflict. The man turned on the engine, not to drive, but to turn on the air conditioning for the children. Deborah thought it was an attempt to escape and came within a few centimeters of the bumper. She continued shouting about disobedience and threatening the community, and her voice had the familiar mix of confidence and excitement that she had whenever the conflict reached its peak. The surveillance footage shows the man cautiously starting to move backwards, at a minimal speed, slower than a human walk. He did not see that Deborah had come close to the car, changing her position so quickly that her figure periodically disappeared in the mirrors. She was trying to look into the cabin to show with a gesture that she will not back down a single step, and moving sideways, did not notice how her foot slipped from the narrow strip of dry asphalt to the area where the water had been spilled. Her soul suddenly lost traction. Deborah fell backwards, hitting the back of her head on the concrete curb. The impact was so loud that people in the neighboring rows took notice. The SUV stopped almost immediately, but the inertia of the short movement was enough for the bumper to touch her leg. It wasn't fatal, but it was enough to cause her body to turn sideways a few more centimeters, and as a result, her head hit the edge again. The man jumped out of the car first. His wife followed. They tried to lift her shoulders, called for help, and a passerby immediately dialed 911. But Deborah did not respond. There was almost no pulse. For several minutes, the family stood around in complete confusion, while people who witnessed the scene tried to keep other visitors away. After the ambulance arrived, it became apparent that the fall had caused a severe head injury that was incompatible with life. Deborah died on the way to the hospital. When the police reviewed the video footage, it became clear that her death was not the result of anyone's aggression or negligence. It was the result of her own actions, a dangerous persistence that pushed her beyond the limits of common sense. The parking lot remained as noisy and crowded as ever, but this time, the line between integrity and obsession was crossed by one person, and she paid a price she never foresaw. These 5 stories show how small, everyday conflicts can end tragically when stubbornness and the desire to control others become more important than common sense. In each case, it was the person's behavior that created the circumstances that ultimately backfired. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and like it. It will help us to promote this video. Thank you for watching.